Formula One on 5 Live.
When we rocked up in Bahrain in March, we were all expecting it to be another Max Verstappen and Red Bull walkover of a season. And to be fair, it did begin like that. However, 13 races in, and I can report that the F1 form book has been torn up. 7 different race winners from the first 13 races, and perhaps a driver's and certainly a constructor's title that is not a foregone conclusion. This is Formula One right now in 2024. And I'm absolutely here for it. And alongside me is the former McLaren F1 mechanic, Mark Priestley. Mark, we have just witnessed a sensational Hungarian Grand Prix. It was already teed up to be an intriguing race with McLaren locking out the front row for the first time in over a decade. Lando Norris on pole position, Oscar Piastri alongside with Verstappen in the Red Bull in third. And it was actually advantage Piastri in the opening stages. But I could not have predicted the following 70 laps.
It was just brilliant. It was drama all the way through from different elements of the race, from different teams and drivers. You're right, Oscar Piastri got his elbows out right from the very beginning. Great launch off the line and found his way into the lead of the Grand Prix. Exactly what he needed to do. But actually the biggest drama really came towards the end, didn't it? And it was all about the interaction between drivers and the engineers and the drama that threw up, the arguments, the conversations got very heated, both at Red Bull and at McLaren. I mean, they're going to need some therapy after that, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we'll get stuck into all of that. This is how it ended. Oscar Piastri won the race, taking his first Grand Prix victory ahead of Lando Norris, with Lewis Hamilton rounding out the podium. Leclerc and Verstappen made up the top 5. But the intriguing part was Piastri led the majority of this race, and then these strategy calls by McLaren, not even strategy calls, just team radio calls that allowed Norris to come into the pits first on both occasions when he wasn't the leading car. Normally it's the other way around in Formula One. And on the second occasion, that allowed him to undercut Oscar Piastri, which essentially means he got out first on quicker tyres, had cleaner air, and was able to make up more ground on the track. Piastri came in second and lost the lead that way. The team almost pleading with Lando Norris on the radio to swap the positions. We weren't hearing much radio back chat from Lando Norris. The radio chat we did hear was very emotional, tugging at the heartstrings of Norris almost, reminding him, we're a team, we can do this together, you need Piastri. I've never heard such a thing in Formula One before.
It was a proper drama playing out. I mean, just to unpick it. So McLaren put themselves into a wonderful position to start with. They locked out the front row in qualifying. It's been a great weekend for them all the way through. They had the quickest car of anybody by quite some margin this weekend. So congratulations for them getting themselves into that place. As the race played out, as you said, Oscar Piastri's leading the Grand Prix. His teammate Lando's behind. There's a comfortable gap behind. It's then to Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. We're talking sort of 10 to 13 seconds in the latter stages of the Grand Prix. Lewis then made a pit stop. And what McLaren will say is they pitted Lando Norris, who was in second, to cover off the potential of an undercut by Lewis. I suspect if you really go into that, there really wasn't much of a threat of an undercut by Lewis, but you can see the argument. They just want to eliminate any risk. So to protect from Lewis finding a way through on faster tyres, they cover that by pitting Lando Norris. The problem with that, as you just said, is normally the lead driver of your pairing would get the prime option on pit stops, which would be to stop first on a circuit like this where the undercut's powerful. So that switched the positions. I think there was not really a big drama in that. I mean, you can understand to an extent why they've done that. The drama really came in how they then sorted out switching the drivers back. So their plan was to play things out that way, and then after the pit stops had finished, ask the drivers to switch the positions back, giving Oscar the lead again. The problem is that they did it so sort of gently and nicely. It was almost the message that initially went to Lando was, you know, when you're ready, if you don't mind, you know, in your own time.
At your own convenience.
At your own convenience. Would you mind letting Oscar back through? It was almost a little bit like that. And of course, when you give a driver that sort of freedom, he'll make his own mind up whether he wants to or not. He didn't want to. Lando was the quicker car of the two. Instead of letting his teammate Oscar Piastri through, he actually opened up an even bigger lead, started putting in faster laps, opened up a gap of about 6 seconds. That, you know, Lando's position was, well, just let him catch up to me and then we can talk about it. Piastri couldn't catch up. He just didn't have the pace to catch up. And so from that perspective, you can understand why Lando's, well, if he can't get near me, this is how we finished the race. I'm the faster car. I think the problem for McLaren was, and let's give a little bit of credit here and understanding, this is new territory for McLaren. They haven't been in a position like this for a very, very long time where they're dominating a Grand Prix. But I think in a situation like that, you need to be forceful. You need to be, you need to, if you've got a clear instruction, and you can argue all day long about whether it was the right instruction to switch to drivers, and they will argue that. But if you've made the call that you want to switch to drivers, you have to be forceful about it. You have to tell the drivers exactly what you need them to do, when you need them to do it, how it's going to happen. And then you make sure that's instigated.
Well, let's hear from both the race winner, Oscar Piastri, and the man who ultimately finished behind him, Lando Norris, speaking with Lawrence Barretto after the race.
Oscar, congratulations, you've finally done it.
Not here.
I know it's obviously come in slightly awkward circumstances, but who cares? It's a great Grand Prix win, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very happy, of course. I put myself in the right position at the start of the race. A little moment in the middle on the hard stint, but at the end we went on to different strategies, trying to cover different people. Effectively it was an undercut. So I think for me it was fair to swap us back. Obviously my pace wasn't quite as good as I would have hoped, but I think an amazing day for the whole team. Obviously a 1-2 for myself, of course, extremely happy. Still some things to improve and work on, definitely, but I feel like I did a lot of things right in that race, so incredibly happy to have my first win.
You've obviously had a fair few near misses over the last few races, or since you've been in Formula One. How satisfying is it that finally things have come together, and how good do you think that is for the future?
It's extremely satisfying. We have had a couple of near misses recently, I think on both sides of the garage. To have my first win is incredible, really. So, it definitely helps with some of the pain we've had from the last few weekends. So, I'll enjoy it for the next few days, and then we go again.
Yeah, happy for the team. I don't know when our last 1-2 in the race was, but probably over 10 years ago or something. So I'm just super happy. I'm happy for Oscar too. Your first, I know he won in Qatar, but I think he'll also say that this win is a lot more than a sprint win. So his first proper win, it's a special moment. So happy for him and for the whole team. An incredible weekend for all of us. Just super happy.
Obviously great to see McLaren right up there, and it bodes well for the championship, but just personally, how difficult was your decision making in that race, I guess, because you just want to win, right?
It's tough, but I know what Oscar's done for me in the past. I think this is a little bit different, but at the same time I got told to let him pass and I did, so it's always tough when you're fighting for a win, and a win means so much to me and also to him, and I just had to try put myself in his shoes and understand it that way, because when you're just, every driver is selfish, and you have to be selfish in this game, but when you're just thinking of your own benefits, you're only thinking of the good things. But of course I put myself in his shoes and I realised I had to do what was right. So.
Well, it was a few laps before he gave up the position. A couple of my standout radio messages that were given to Lando Norris. I know you'll do the right thing. Remember the Sunday morning briefings. The way to win a championship is not by yourself. You're going to need Oscar. You're going to need the team. But ultimately, we have seen this before, team orders, swapping positions. But if that had been Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen, they would be the winners of the Hungarian Grand Prix right now, surely.
I think so. There's no way Max is moving over, is there, at the latter stages of a Grand Prix? And look, there's so many elements to this and so many different perspectives, all which feel correct. Do you know what I mean? You can look at Oscar's perspective and say, well, absolutely. They didn't really need to cover off Lewis Hamilton, but they did it anyway just to be safe. So in doing so, absolutely, they should swap the positions back because Oscar didn't put a foot wrong, really. He did a great start, put himself in that position, drove a wonderful race, looked after his tyres, under control for almost all of it. So he's got no reason to feel like that wasn't the right call. When you look at Lando's perspective, he will argue that he was the faster car at the end of that Grand Prix. And yes, the strategy on today's, just as it happened today, fell his way. And that sort of undercut, as it effectively was, worked in his favour. But he was the faster guy. And if, Oscar was able to close up on him and catch him, then absolutely it would have been a different discussion. I think the bigger problem, as I said before, is how McLaren have handled this. And partly because they've tiptoed around the issue and it left it way too open. And yes, I know Lando did the right thing in the end, or did what the team wanted him to do. But it took a lot of laps and a lot of, quite awkward discussion that played out publicly for that to happen. The team will figure this out. They haven't been in this position. I've been at McLaren under a very different leadership regime with Ron Dennis. I can tell you that would not have happened under Ron Dennis because, the race engineer is the guy that talks to the drivers all the time until it gets serious, and then Ron steps in. And it's happened. It happened with Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso when they were arguing against each other in a similar sort of way at Monaco. Only until the point where Ron got on the radio. It was such a rare occasion, but when Ron steps in, it's got serious, stuff's got real, and the argument stops.
But ultimately, in those days, okay, they had great success, but then, Ron Dennis made himself an enemy up and down the paddock. Yes, he was hard and fast, and it got jobs done. But ultimately, McLaren eventually dropped off and tailed off, and Ron Dennis made a departure and was kind of pushed out of McLaren at the end of the day. Is this, perhaps, are we all missing something here? An absolute blinder by Andrea Stella, who is trying to almost install a new way of thinking within a Formula One team? Because ultimately, yes, there was a bit of dilly-dallying on the radio. Please do this, can you do that at your convenience? They still got a 1-2 finish at the end of it. And McLaren, all their hopes are on a Constructors' Championship. I imagine they don't really care which driver wins it. They want the team championship secured. And if they can do that and install this almost harmonious environment with the team, maybe that actually works better and is more beneficial for the long term than any of the previous Ron Dennis hard and fast in and out culture.
I think we're talking about two different things though. You're talking about the team culture and the way the team is run, the management style, and 100% agree. Ron Dennis's way of doing things is not necessarily the way that it works today. And Andrea Stella and the whole team at McLaren are doing an amazing job. The very fact we're even talking about this is testament to all the work that's gone in so successfully. But Formula One is a business that's absolutely results-driven, highly pressurised, and there comes moments in races when you've got to make quick, clear, decisive decisions with your drivers. Today they had, luckily for them, they had the luxury of giving, Lando had a good 4, 5, 6 laps to sort of mull this over in his head and come to his own conclusion about what he thought was the right thing after a lot of sort of emotional persuasion from his race engineer. If you haven't got that luxury of all those laps, someone needs to come on and be utterly decisive and just lay the law down and say, right, this is what's happening. We'll discuss it later. I don't want to criticise McLaren at all, really, because they got the 1-2 result. As you said, it's a wonderful day for the team. I'm so happy for all of them. And it's just part of the learning process. The races that have slipped through their fingers in recent times have been because they're just finding their way back towards the front. This is a new experience for them, finding themselves in a position with 2 drivers going for the race win, maybe even a championship, puts a whole different set of challenges in front of you. And they'll make mistakes as they figure out how to navigate those.
So this was a mistake today from McLaren, because ultimately Lando Norris lost 7 points in the battle for the Drivers' Championship. And I can't even believe we're saying a battle for the Drivers' Championship, but it is not beyond the realms of possibility if McLaren continue to deliver, having the quickest car in Formula One right now, and Verstappen continues to show frustrated. He had a contact with Hamilton towards the end of the race. He still finished, but down in 5th as it currently stands. He's under investigation for a penalty for that incident, so he may well get a penalty. But if we get to the end of the year and there's 7 points in it that clinches it for Max Verstappen, that is a monumental error from McLaren.
Well, yeah, and we'll only know that, of course, at the end of the year. It's difficult to say they made too many mistakes when they've come out of the weekend, having had a clean sweep of locking out the front row and then finishing first and second. But make no mistake, whilst it seems like a long shot in terms of a drivers' championship, Lando Norris believes it's achievable. And that's why he was so angry and upset on the radio in those closing stages. That's why it was so hard for him to give up the lead of the race, because he feels that it might come down to those 7 points. It could be that close by the end. McLaren 100% have the quickest car now. Today, Red Bull was struggling. They've only got one car in a fight. Perez is nowhere near the level of Max Verstappen every single weekend. We may even see a driver change at Red Bull halfway through this season. That can throw the team into turmoil. But they haven't got a car that's quick enough. They haven't developed it in the same way McLaren have. So if the form book as it is today, and there will be elements of this that are circuit specific, but McLaren have been pretty quick everywhere. If this continues, why can't we end up with a championship fight towards the end of the season?
What do you think Lando Norris and Will Joseph, his race engineer, are going to be talking about this evening? Because there's one message, and this isn't word for word, I am paraphrasing, that actually is just sort of stuck out to me, that Will Joseph has said to Norris during the race is something along the lines of, we're trying to protect you. And that can be read in a multitude of different ways. One of the ways I'm seeing it as is actually in this world of public scrutiny, left, right and centre, is he almost saying, if you take this win, you're going to be getting a load of stick, because it's so easy to make it seem like actually Norris is being the bad guy here, even though it's the team that put him in that situation to retake the lead of the Grand Prix. Yeah,
I think that's exactly what he's doing. He's trying to manage how this looks. It would look, to some people, it would look bad.
Which wouldn't have happened back in the day.
No. Well, no, it wouldn't. But I'm not sure that we'd have ended up in this situation in the same way back in the day. I think there's two sides. There's, one of the messages came along and said something along the lines of, you don't want to win a championship in this way. You want to do it the right way. And yes, of course, there's truth in that. But when you're a driver, when you're Lando Norris, you've got a tiny sniff, albeit an outside chance of a championship. Pretty sure you'd take it any way you like, any way you can. He's never done it before. First opportunity he's ever had. He wants to grab every opportunity he can. And as you said, those 7 points could be crucial.
Well, the gap now in the Drivers' Championship between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris has shrunk. It's now less than 70 points between the two of them, 69. And then in the Constructors, it is 51 points now between Red Bull, who continue to lead, and McLaren, who have just stepped up into that second place, with Ferrari falling down to third. So, all in all, an absolutely fantastic weekend for McLaren, but it had to be this way, didn't it? It couldn't be a straightforward, easy 1-2. Considering over the last few races, people have been picking, and we are guilty of it as well. Canada, you could have won. British Grand Prix could have been a 1-2. Couple of maybe other smaller strategic errors at some other races. Today, they did actually theoretically get the strategy right because they secured a 1-2. Just the team radio management was the thing that is questionable.
Yeah, exactly. And it's only really questionable in terms of when they review what happened this race and how they manage the drivers and how they manage this new situation. Like I said, something we've not been in before. They'll review that and they'll understand that perhaps there could have been things they could have done differently. That's the same every single race. But let's make no mistake, this is a signal that McLaren are back. Not just through lucking into a sort of weird set of circumstances, nothing to do with weather playing into their strengths. There was no safety car that was fortuitous for them. Outright pace. They dominated the whole weekend, and by a mile. They were in a league of their own today.
Well, the man who finished 14.8 seconds behind Lando Norris was Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, who rounded out the podium. And he had a bit of late race drama with Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. The two of them came to blows down into turn one. They both managed to get away with very minor damage, if anything. But it was a frustrating race for Max Verstappen, who started third, was frustrated after qualifying yesterday and all throughout the race today with a car that has brought significant upgrades this weekend. The radio chatter, once again, through the roof across this Grand Prix, and between Max Verstappen and his race engineer, Gianpiero Lambiase, it does often get heated and blunt, but today it felt like it went a little bit above and beyond. They were very much exchanging, well, on Verstappen's side, a lot of swear words. I'm not going to get into a radio fight with other teams, is what GP said on the radio. It's childish when talking about Verstappen trying to get the stewards to look at some of the incidents he was involved in on the track. There was a lot of heated exchanges between the two. Now he's cooled off out of the car. Lawrence caught up with him.
Hey Max, I don't think I've ever heard you so frustrated on team radio. Understandable, because I know how the race was unfolding from you, but from your perspective, was this one of the most frustrating races you've had for a long time?
Well, I mean, on a day where you're already not the quickest, I think we should have done a better job with the strategy. The first one, okay, to be undercut there, I was not happy with it, but can happen. You get caught out. Then, of course, I get stuck a very long time. I lose a lot of lap time trying to fight with Lewis, fair enough. Then they leave me out again, thinking that, we can then extract our pace, but then I get stuck behind back markers where they were, I think, doing quite okay lap time. So for me to close in on them within 2 seconds with old tires, you lose a lot of grip. So even by staying out and basically trying to create your advantage at the end, I couldn't extract my full pace as well. So again, that was just a bad call. And then, we had to go back onto the medium, but the tire advantage was not that massive on a day where, first of all, also the track temperature is very high, so tires are really hot, and as soon as you get behind cars, the tires are overheated within 2 laps of following. Plus, our car is already not the quickest. That makes it all in all just very difficult, to fight back from behind on a track layout like this with the temperature. So I think we should have thought about that a bit more in our decision making.
So where do you kind of go from now? Obviously it's not a crisis, but it's been a few races now where things are difficult. The car's obviously not up to pace. There's maybe been a few things that disagreeing on, or however you want to put it. What do you need to do now?
We need to work. I mean, it's not like suddenly next weekend we can have new upgrades on the car. So yeah, it is a problem. I mean, we know that we are lacking compared to McLaren, and that's of course not nice. But we have to analyze all stuff, how we can maybe improve the overall package that we have currently. But I don't think that's something like very easily done, and we'll see next week how it will evolve. But at the moment, I think race pace, qualifying pace, we are behind.
I think Verstappen quite scathing there of how he's referring to the team. They decided to pit me early. That was a mistake. A car that's bringing upgrades. He was constantly on the radio talking about brake bias and steering, how he couldn't turn in. The brakes weren't connecting properly. And then it spilled out towards the end with that silly contact with Lewis Hamilton. Talk us through what happened in that incident.
Well, just before I get to the incident, he was frustrated all day, and I do think it spilled over, but the frustration actually just came from the fact that he was slow in comparison. It's not a situation he's used to being in, and there's an argument that some people will think this sounds like a petulant kid who's suddenly had his toys taken away, doesn't it? Because he's been so used to dominating Grand Prix weekends, and now he's not. He's seeing someone else dominate and him having to desperately chase. And uncharacteristically, we did see Red Bull make some mistakes in their strategy. I agree to some extent with what Max said. They got some of their calls wrong. When they review it, I'm pretty sure that's what they'll find. Leaving him out and being undercut twice feels like a mistake. So I get his frustration, but then in those closing laps, whilst this argument was playing out over the radio that we all heard, that you referred to a moment ago, it was just after that, or in the midst of that, that he took a huge lunge down the inside on Lewis Hamilton, came from a long way back. It wasn't completely out of the question that he could take on a move like that. But as Lewis began to turn in gradually for the corner, the gap began to close. And just as Max had to turn his wheel to sort of move towards the apex, he was still hard on the brakes. He locked up both front tyres, effectively slid out of control across the corner. And Max Verstappen's left rear wheel made quite heavy contact with Lewis Hamilton's right front, launching the Red Bull into the air. Amazing that they both managed to actually carry on and didn't have bits hanging off the car. But of course, it did spell the end for any hope of a podium for Max Verstappen, and there could well still be a penalty coming his way.
3 races now since Verstappen was last on the top step. Spain. Which
the tables have turned.
I'm really having to rewire my brain in that front. But this does feel that suddenly, the minute he goes on the back foot, we get the Max Verstappen of old, and we all thought the championship fights with Hamilton and then the dominance thereafter had kind of matured him as a driver. And look, you talked to Max Verstappen out of the car, and honestly, he's one of the nicest blokes in the paddock. He really is. But when that helmet goes on, he is business. But today, it was a little disappointing. They were both lucky to get away with no contact. He was never making the corner. He steamed into turn one. I just feel like, is this how quickly it goes back to Verstappen of old? He's so used to having that dominance that the minute his toys get taken away from him, suddenly he's kicking and screaming.
It feels a bit like that, not just about the incident, the contact with Hamilton, but much more to do with the way he was speaking over the radio, because he was complaining about the car from, I think 5 or 6 laps into the Grand Prix, but then doing it all the way through the Grand Prix. And actually the radio messages got quite nasty between the two. It sounded petulant. It certainly wasn't pleasant, and it was very awkward to listen to. I don't think that the sort of relationships between driver and engineer, either at Red Bull or McLaren, will suffer greatly as a result of this, because these things happen. I've heard it happen all of the time. As soon as you get out of the car and you debrief and you chat about it, the relationship, I've no doubt, will go back to normal. But it is interesting. You just mentioned a key point there in that interview when he talked about the team using the word they left me out, they did this. Normally you hear a driver talking in the sense of we did this. We tried a different strategy. We tried something different. It didn't work out. But he's talking about the team in this distant way. And there will be people that will immediately start to jump to the sort of conversation of, well, is he going to stay at Red Bull? He hasn't got a car that's now dominant. There's lots of talk about could he jump ship and go to Mercedes even as quickly as next year. I don't think the arguments on the radio or the contact in the car today will affect that. But the fact that he no longer has a car in which he's able to dominate a sport, and look, let's caveat it by he's still got a massive lead in the championship and could still come away with another title here, but he's not having it all his own way anymore.
He's not. And look, the points are coming down towards Max Verstappen. Lando Norris is closing in on him. Is it beyond the realm of possibility? We all think and know the constructors' fight is on. McLaren's momentum is monumental. But if Verstappen, all he needs is a few more of these subpar races where the car is not intertwined with himself, a couple of more 5th places, maybe even a DNF, while McLaren continue to pump in 1-2 finishes, podium finishes, wins, that could turn around very quickly. Could we have a drivers' championship battle on our hands?
Yeah, I don't think it's out of the question here. Max Verstappen, we suspect, is going to take some kind of engine penalty later in this season because he's already taken quite a few elements. That's almost certainly coming. That could hamper him at a certain Grand Prix. But also, importantly, McLaren do have 2 drivers that are able to I'm going to make myself sound funny by saying they're going to work together, because they certainly didn't work together particularly smoothly today. But they have the option, because they're both quick in a very quick car, to be around the same part of the racetrack and to work together as a team to defend against a Verstappen. Verstappen doesn't have that. Verstappen doesn't have a teammate that's anywhere near the same level. And that is a problem that Red Bull are having to seriously consider and maybe even take steps to rectify. But the idea of Verstappen leaving Red Bull and maybe making this shock, what might be a shock move to Mercedes, I'm not saying this just off the back of what happened today in terms of the disagreements with the engineering team and the way that the strategy played out, but Max hasn't got a car now that's the quickest car in the field. That's clear. That's McLaren. But there are other teams around them now that are starting to outdevelop Red Bull. Mercedes are, in fact, one of those. Ferrari have still got lots of opportunity to improve their car. So if we get towards the end of the season and actually the Red Bull's the 3rd quickest car, or Mercedes start to get more and more results, they won the last 2 Grand Prix. They won more Grand Prix than Verstappen has in the last 2 or 3 rounds. So that, I don't think, is beyond the realms of possibility that could actually happen.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, if we look further down the order, we've spoken a lot about 1st, 2nd and 5th, which is ultimately where Verstappen finished on the road. Of course, at the time we're recording, he is still under investigation. We are expecting that to have happened already, so we're frantically looking to see if that comes through or not. But further down the order then, I mean, we had Hamilton in 3rd, 200th podium in Formula One. Great way to bounce back from what actually was a bit of a subpar qualifying. And his teammate, George Russell, clawed back to 8th, having started down in 17th, just behind Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull, who started in 16th. Decent recovery drives from them.
Yeah, from both of them, I'd say. To get themselves both into the points after what was a real disaster in qualifying, I think it is a fair Sunday afternoon. It's a shame. I think Russell will be disappointed that he wasn't able to take Perez because Perez has been, on such a sort of downward spiral in terms of confidence and even ability in the car that Russell might have thought that he could have had put a challenge together, but just wasn't to be the case today. But I think, in terms of making the best of what was a dire situation this weekend, I think that will go down as a decent one.
Sainz was 6th, Perez 7th, Russell 8th, Stroll rounded out the points in 10th, and I think a little shout out needs to go to Yuki Tsunoda for 9th, the only man to do a one-stop.
Yeah, which was a real tough ask on a track that's pretty tough on tyres anyway. Temperature's very, very high, well up into the sort of 45-degree track temperature, so that punishes the tyres as well. So he had to drive a very different race to everyone else to be able to keep them alive, but that's exactly what he did. So, yeah, to get points, inside the top 10, I think is decent.
Crucial points for the RB team, who are embroiled in a great fight for 6th in the constructors with Haas and Alpine, who ended up not scoring anything. Just outside the points, Alonso ahead of Ricciardo, then it was Hülkenberg, Albon, Magnussen in the top 15, Bottas, Sargent, Ocon and Zhou, the 19 drivers who finished the race, with Pierre Gasly the only driver to retire. It's been a tough couple of weeks for Pierre Gasly, who didn't even start the British Grand Prix and does not finish here in Budapest. Right, I think we've just about covered everything from that. Driver of the day, Mark Priestley.
Goodness me, that's a really tough one, isn't it?
It is.
You could look at those two we mentioned, the Perez and Russell, for fighting their way all the way through. I think officially Piastri got it from the F1 driver of the day. I think I'd probably agree with Piastri. I think he had a really good start. That was the crucial part that set him up in the position to then go on to win the race. Yes, he had a little bit of help from the team in the end, but you could also argue they hindered him with the strategy as well. So I thought he drove a good race.
I really don't know.
Who are you saying?
I don't know who to pick. I'm going to go with Piastri as my driver of the day. I think I'm gonna go with Piastri. He won his first ever Grand Prix, and you can't take that away from him.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Now, because when I host these, I like to get the thoughts of our producers for their driver of the day. So, Paddy and Pete, driver of the day, please. Of course, you can't hear them, but they'll tell me in my ear. Hamilton from Pete, and what's Paddy saying?
I can't believe Pete's saying Logan Sargent. Unbelievable.
Normally Paddy goes for Joe Guan Yu, but just didn't have it for this occasion. That is it for our Checkered Flag podcast for the Hungarian Grand Prix. We can all now take a big breath after that. Yeah, what an epic weekend of racing. And the Formula One form book, as I said right at the start, really is being rewritten with every race that we approach. And indeed, we only have one more before we get to the summer break. So join us next time out in Belgium around that beautiful Spa-Francorchamps circuit. Could McLaren do it again? Could Verstappen bounce back? What about Mercedes? Remember, they were on back-to-back wins coming into this weekend. They will be looking to try and get back onto that top step of the podium. Mark Priestley, thank you very much, along with Andrew Benson as well for his insights across the weekend. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.